Well, I think that many of you have probably seen by now that Time magazine recently named its Person of the Year for 2019. And that person is Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old environmental activist who has been speaking her voice and inspiring millions of people around the world to take action against climate change. Greta is the youngest person ever to be named Person of the Year. And she is among so many brave and courageous young women who are speaking truth and who are affecting change in the world. Think, for example, of Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani advocate for women's education and women's empowerment. She is the youngest Nobel Prize laureate ever. Think of Emma Gonzalez. She's the high school senior who survived the Parkland school shooting, and she has been using her voice to advocate for gun control. She has become the face and voice of that movement. These young women today, teenagers, are proclaiming to the world that the status quo has to change, that old things, old ways of doing things have to pass away so that we can renew the face of the earth. Now, I share their stories with you this morning because today, on the fourth and final Sunday of Advent, we are putting our focus on another brave young teenager, Mary, Jesus' mother. Mary, like Emma, like Malala, like Greta, was proclaiming to the world that change is coming and that change was going to be birthed through her. I think Mary is so important, not just in the life of Jesus, but in our spiritual lives today. And yet we very rarely hear about her at church. The church lectionary on Sundays, our gospel readings, we hardly ever hear about Mary. In fact, this is the only Sunday in 2019 that she is in our lectionary reading. And the reason for that is that Mary is only mentioned in the Bible 4 times. That's it. Mary is mentioned more times in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, than she is in the Bible. Muslims have a great reverence for Mary, the mother of Jesus, more so than most Christians do. Most Christians today, even progressive ones like us, we only think of Mary at Christmas when we put out the nativity set. It's the only time of the year we think about her. We forget about her the whole rest of the year. And last year at this time, I speculated why. I think most Christians I talk to today think that Mary is just for Catholics. And I think they're a little bit wary of that. Last year I called my talk, Wary of Mary. And what I really think Christians today are wary of is that Catholic devotion to Mary seems to put her on a pedestal that's higher than Jesus. Or they seem to think that the Catholics' devotion to Mary kind of borders on idolatry. I don't believe that. I think many of you know that I grew up Catholic, and as a young man in my 20s, I entered a religious order of brothers who are known as the Marist Brothers. They're a group of men who are devoted to Mary. And the motto of the Marist Brothers in Latin is Ad Jesum per Mariam, which means to Jesus through Mary. And each and every morning at the monastery and every evening before we went to bed, we gathered together as a community to sing songs and to say prayers to Mary, who was our way to Jesus. And although I am no longer a Catholic, Mary is still very much a part of my spiritual life, not just at Christmas, but throughout the year. For me, she is the feminine face of God. She represents the divine mother, the birther of the cosmos, the birther of the light. For much of human history, the church and our world in general has been dominated by the masculine voice, and the feminine voice has been repressed and stifled. We need that voice so much. We need to hear that feminine voice so much right now. And Greta and Malala and Emma and the other young women today, they are bringing forth that voice. The spirit of Mary is coming alive, and we need that right now with what's happening in our world. The author Rob Bell, who many of you know, Rob Bell wrote many wonderful books, but one of the books he wrote is called What We Talk About When We Talk About God. And in that book, he says this: when the female voice is repressed and stifled, the entire community can find themselves cut off from the sacred feminine, depriving themselves of the full image of God. The full image of God, my friends, is both masculine and feminine. God is both mother and father. And to me, Mary represents God as mother. That's the symbol. But who is the real person? Who really was Mary? Well, we have grown up in the Christian church hearing that she was this meek and mild, gentle, obedient handmaiden. She was the good virgin, totally perfect and pure. But all of that is a myth. Mary was not any of those things. Mary was bold and courageous and radical and revolutionary. Again, think of Emma and Malala and Greta, those teenagers today. That was Mary. That's who she was. But yet, we kind of grew up with her in a very different image. The time in which Mary lived, she was at the lowest place in society. She was a woman, she was poor, and she was an unwed, pregnant teenager. Mary, if that was found out, she would have been put to death. She was at the lowest rung of society, both religiously, politically, and socially. She was the lowest of the low. And yet of all the people in the world, God chose her to give birth to the light. God chose the lowly to give birth to the light. In our call to worship this morning, we actually get to hear Mary's voice, the words of Mary, her song of love to God, which is known as the Magnificat. And the Magnificat is not some pretty, innocuous little love song. As we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning from Reverend Don Hutchings, the Magnificat is a subversive song of resistance. It's Mary's protest song, her song of liberation and revolution. Mary was proclaiming that a new world order was on its way. She said, God has looked with favor upon me, a lowly person, and from now on, generations of people like me will be called blessed. God is taking the mighty and powerful and taking them down from their thrones. And God's lifting up the lowly people like me and filling us with good things. That's what she's proclaiming, a new world order. And you can see why those words would be so threatening. And they've been threatening through the centuries. You know, the British government during their rule of India actually forbade the Magnificat from being sung in churches. And in Argentina, during the reign of Juan Perón, they forbid the Magnificat from being read aloud in church or anywhere in public. And in the 1980s in Guatemala, they also forbade the Magnificat from being spoken because they were afraid that it would lead to revolution among the poor, oppressed masses, that they would revolt. They were trying to silence and repress that feminine voice that was calling for change. And today, we hear men in power trying to silence and mock people like Greta and Malala and Emma. I see the spirit of Mary in them, and I see the spirit of Mary in the women who have been speaking out in the past couple of years in the Me Too and Time's Up movements. Women who are finally speaking their voice after years of being silenced by men in power. And I see the spirit of Mary in those brave and courageous migrant women. Women who, like Mary herself, a refugee, traveled miles seeking safe haven for their child, only to be denied room and refuge. Our friend, Ryan Kuja, the author of the book From the Inside Out, he translated the Magnificat into more modern language, and I'd like to read it for you. Mary says, "I can't contain my excitement about this. Out of all people, God noticed me, a poor pregnant teenager. Everyone will call people like me blessed from now on. God's love is so much greater than I can even imagine. God loves everyone, even people like me who society despises, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, refugees, the addicted and shamed. God knows that Black lives matter, that refugees and immigrants are God's beloved. All the people who are seen as less than human, God knows and loves. God lifts up those who are preyed upon by corrupt politicians, the hungry, the ones brutalized by the police and by immigration and customs agents, and families without health care. God invites each of us to the table to speak and to tell our story, to be heard and to be known. The power-hungry perpetrators who care only about their agendas don't have the last word. I can sense God's presence holding me and all God's children close, faithfully liberating us all, just as God has promised." So the Magnificat is so timeless. It speaks to our time today. We, like Mary, are being called to announce change is coming, a new world order. The rich and powerful will be pulled down from their thrones, and the lowly will be lifted up high. So that's what it means for us today. We, my friends, we, like Mary, are being called by God to proclaim that change, that new world order, that light is on its way. But in order for us to be bearers of that light, we, like Mary, we have to have the courage to say yes. We have to have the courage to say, yes, I want to be a mother of God. The 13th century Christian mystic Meister Eckhart said, all of us are called to be mothers of God because God is always needing to be born. He said that in the 13th century. All of us are called to be mothers of God because God is always needing to be born. And notice it's present tense. We don't say Christ was born. We say Christ is born. You know, every single time we welcome the stranger, Christ is born. Every single time we lift up the lowly and feed the hungry, Christ is born. Every single time we pull down the mighty from their thrones, Christ is born. When we care for the planet and empower women, when we speak truth to the powers that be, Christ is born. That's what Advent's all about. Advent is a time of preparation for us to allow ourselves to become pregnant with the light so that we can be bearers of that light. We can birth that light in this time of darkness. So in the days now leading us up to Christmas, let us prepare ourselves for the light, and let us rejoice as Mary did, for God has chosen us to be bearers of the light. And may I encourage you to call upon Mary, not just at Christmas, but throughout the year. She's not just for Catholics. She's for all of us. Namaste.